There is something we rarely talk about when it comes to power. We assume bad outcomes come from bad intentions, that damage starts with cruelty, with villains. But most damage does not begin that way. It begins with confidence, a voice that sounds certain, a message repeated often enough to feel true, and a system that quietly mistakes conviction for competence. When power stops hearing no, truth becomes optional. Accountability feels like an attack, and applause starts to matter more than evidence. That is not a personality flaw, that is a structural problem. After Power Test Week, this should already feel familiar, not because the situations are identical, but because the incentives are. Hello, welcome back to Smart AF, the show where we cut through the noise and give you the facts straight up. Let us start by zooming out and looking at how this actually plays out. Take Ukraine. This is not just a war story, it is a limits story. One person decides borders are optional. Institutions hesitate. Others comply, justify, or stay silent. And power learns something dangerous. Rules are negotiable if you are confident enough. The lesson here is not, this leader is bad. The lesson is what happens when systems fail to say no early, clearly, and collectively. Now look at Venezuela. This country did not collapse overnight. It eroded. Checks became formalities. Courts became decorations. Elections became performances. Every step was explained as temporary, necessary, for stability, until the system no longer served the people at all. And when power stopped serving the public, it did not disappear. It concentrated. Another form of power moved in, not to represent people, but to benefit itself. What was meant to protect citizens became a tool for extraction. That is what power without limits looks like in slow motion. It does not arrive screaming, it arrives applauded. Then there is Gaza. No matter where you stand politically, this is a human example of what happens when decisions are made far from consequences. Power debates strategy. People live with outcomes. When accountability is blurred, suffering becomes abstract. And when suffering becomes abstract, limits disappear. This is not about sides. It is about distance from consequence. Power without proximity to harm becomes reckless, every time. Now let us talk about the United States. Not because it is uniquely broken, but because it is very publicly testing its limits. You see it when confidence is treated as credibility, when volume replaces verification, when institutions are framed as enemies instead of guardrails. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Systems do not break because everyone agrees. They break because enough people decide that pushing back is exhausting. Silence starts to feel reasonable. Applause starts to feel safe. And restraint gets rebranded as weakness. People often say, "But I do not support that leader." That is not the question. The question is what behavior is rewarded, what is normalized, what is excused because it is familiar. Power does not need your loyalty, it needs your tolerance. And this is where the story usually stops, but it should not. Because there are moments where power is tested not by crowds, but by a single refusal. In the United States, one of the clearest recent examples is Mike Pence. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary and chose restraint. He had power in that moment, and he chose limits. He said no when saying yes would have been easier, safer, more profitable. And the cost was immediate. Political exile, public vilification, threats to his safety, a political career that became untenable almost overnight. That is what accountability looks like in real life. Not applause, not praise, but consequences. And this is the part we rarely say out loud. Doing the right thing often means losing something. Status, reputation, influence, sometimes safety, sometimes everything. We like to believe courage is rewarded. History suggests otherwise. Courage is punished first, validated later, if at all. But without people willing to absorb that cost, limits are theoretical. Laws do not enforce themselves. Constitutions do not defend themselves. Democracy does not survive on vibes. It survives because someone somewhere is willing to say no, knowing it may end their career, their comfort, or their standing. Those people do not need to be perfect. They do not need to be heroes. They just need to refuse. So when we ask, what happens when power has no limits? The answer is not chaos at first. The answer is applause. then normalization, then damage. And by the time it looks obvious, the cost is already human. This is not about fear. It is about responsibility, not just of leaders, but of systems, institutions, media, and crowds. Power will always push. What matters is who is willing to say no. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who needs this info, please share this video with them. If you found this interesting, a thumbs up and subscribe would mean a lot. And tap the bell so you never miss an update. Disclaimer: this episode reflects my personal analysis and interpretation of publicly available information. It is intended for educational and commentary purposes only and does not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice.